This is the book that we're going to be talking about.
Thank you.
Field notes. I'm Phoebe Boucher, and I'm the managing editor of Raven Chronicles Press. Thank you for joining us today for Raven Talk, Raven's online podcast. We are hosting monthly conversations with writers, artists, and cultural warriors. Today, independent art historian Susan Noyes Platt is talking to Ann Batchelor Hursey about Hursey's recently published book, Field Notes to Maya Lin's Confluence Project Landscapes. And I want to thank Tom for being here to help us from Jack Straw Cultural Center. And at the end, we hope to have a 5 or 10 minute question and answer session. And you can put a question in chat, or you can, after the slideshow, you could raise your hand live and we'll answer any questions you might have. Please mute your phones or turn them off. Since this project seems to have very few people that really know about it, this is why this is an important thing we're doing today. The project was initially a response from the tribes and nations in Oregon and Washington State to the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial in 2004. It is a series of 6 earthworks designed by Maya Lin of the Vietnam Memorial fame and situated at historically significant points of contact between settler colonists, indigenous people, species, and ecologies along the Columbia River in Oregon and Washington. The Confluence Project is the largest example of landscape art in the United States, extending along the Columbia River in 6 sites along 438 miles from Cape Disappointment to Chief Timothy Park near Idaho. Lynn has been working on it since 2002 in collaboration with Native tribes, bands, and nations. I chose Ann and Susan for this podcast as both have explored in their own different ways this project. Susan has written extensively about it and visited most of the sites. Ann Hursey's new book, Field Notes, uses poetry and personal observations, journal notes, and historical references to explore the very same territories. So this is kind of a very interesting way that they're both going to be talking about this project. And short bios. After many years as a tenured professor of art history, Susan Platt is currently an independent art historian and freelance art critic and curator. She's based in Seattle. Her soon-to-be published book will be Setting Our Hearts on Fire, Collected Writings, Volume 2, Essays on Artists from 1982 to the Present. Her blog, Art and Politics Now, is an important blog because she covers art and artists that nobody else is doing. So you should go check it out if you haven't seen her blog. Ann Hursey's poems have appeared in Cascadia Review, Crab Creek Review, and Floating Bridge Review, among many others. Her poem, What Lay Open, was nominated by Penduline Press for the Best of the Net in 2012. Ann has taught creative writing to young writers with powerful schools and adults at the Richard Hugo House. She is the graduate of the Rainier Writing Workshop MFA at the Pacific Lutheran University. And she's been awarded writing residencies with Jack Straw and Soapstone, which is in Oregon. Her first collection, A Certain Hold, was published by Finishing Line Press in 2014. Thanks for listening, and I'm turning this over to Susan now.
Well, thank you, Phoebe, for that wonderful introduction. And before we even start, I want to salute you, Phoebe, as a catalyst in the Seattle literary scene, bringing together artists and writers and poets. And it's just unbelievable what you've done with the magazine and now the publications that you're doing. Thank you very much.
And I'm going to jump in on that because I've known Phoebe over 20 years, and we've crossed paths at copy machines, poetry readings, open mics, and most recently at a September poetry reading at Daybreak Star, which was outside and in person. And she said, "Hey, Ann, what you up to?" And I talked to her about my new book, and she goes, "Oh, you're going to have to meet this friend of mine." So that's how we got here. Anyway, thank you, Phoebe, for Raven Chronicles, because you are Raven Chronicles. Thank you. Okay. Susan.
All right. Should I put up my slideshow? Let's see if it works.
We're kind of new at this.
I'm going to try. How's that? Okay.
It looks good. Looks good.
Everyone can see it?
I can
Okay.
see it.
All right. That just tells you what you already know. And we're going to move into the first picture. If I can make it. Oops. Why isn't it working? Tom.
Susan,
Okay. I got it.
There we go.
Okay. There's the book. And this is our first picture. She Who Watches. And isn't this?
And this is where you want me to stop and say why She Who Watches is here?
Well,
Okay.
that was your starting point for your project, and you have some beautiful paragraphs in the first page of your book about She Who Watches.
Okay, so thank you, Susan. I'm just going to read out of my book. It says, I met She Who Watches not at Columbia Hill State Park, the real She Who Watches, but at Pike Place Market, and it was 2012. So basically 10 years ago, I met her. I was looking for something like I often do, and I go through the craft aisles as well as the food aisles. And there I see something that I couldn't take my eyes off of. In a corner booth overlooking Puget Sound was a woman's face carved on an amulet clustered among many trinkets. And as I drew closer, her wide opened, almond-shaped eyes stared straight into me. Her ears like a bear listening. Her strong nose and open mouth were ready to speak. I didn't know her name, but I needed to learn more. I bought that necklace, which had her face etched on a silver dollar-sized black pendant, and began my journey with She Who Watches. Her real name, her Wishram name, is Shaglal, and she's the largest petroglyph in what is today called the Columbia Hill State Park, located on the Washington side of the Columbia River. And when I asked her, who or what are you watching? I discovered she was looking across the river at Celilo Village. Her village was known for its bounty of salmon during spring and autumn runs. It was the longest continually inhabited gathering place in North America. Tribes from up and down the river came here to barter, socialize, and hold sacred ceremonies. When Lewis and Clark encountered this bustling village in 1805, they called it the Great Mart. So I did more research, and then I learned that in legend, Shaglal was the last of the women chiefs in the Wishram village of Nixtladix. No wonder I found her face so compelling.
So then from that starting point, we need to speak about the Confluence project itself as being absolutely a collaboration between Maya Lin and Native tribal groups. Here you see Maya Lin with Horace Axel, who was the elder of the Nez Perce tribe. And you see here on the right, some of the Native people who came to join in the project. So that is actually one of the most important features of the Confluence project. And here, Phoebe mentioned the locations, but I thought it would be helpful for people to see a map. We're going to start with Cape Disappointment, and then we'll go to the land bridge, the bird blind. We will go that we'll come back here later. The story circles, the listening circles, way over in the east, which is the only one I haven't been to. And then we're going to end at Celilo Park, and you'll see why when we get there. So the first place that Anne went for her exploration was Cape Disappointment. And it actually is a very complicated site. The two red dots suggest there's actually 4 different Maya Lin installations there. Each of those red dots represents 2 installations. So Anne, you started at this site, the fish cleaning table, right?
Right. And I just want to just back up a little bit. The book would not have been written if it wasn't for Cape Disappointment, because I was turned around the whole time I was there. So let me, this is why this book got written. So let me just read the first couple paragraphs. Do not, my husband was my companion. So do not, as we did, begin your journey of discovery early in the week to visit Maya Lin's art installation at the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Museum in February, even if you want to visit the museum. The museum keeps winter hours and is closed Sundays through Wednesdays, as if the name Cape Disappointment was not clue enough. So just like Lewis and Clark, I crave maps. And as a 21st century non-Indigenous woman, I look for signage to locate these installations. There are small brown and green Confluence project signs, but they are not obvious. New signage has been added since this entry, because after all, Maya Lin's art installations make visible what was already here: the land, the water, the animals, and the people. Okay, now we can go to the fish cleaning table. I love the fish cleaning table. It was the first one we found. And let me start with a small poem that gives you the mood. And for those of you who don't have my book, it's written in a Hypatia style, which is narrative and small haiku, sometimes linked. So this is 3 linked haiku. Fish cleaning table, carved from solid basalt, gleams as 2 otters swim by. Etched in the basalt is the Chinook Chehalis origin story. Read and understand how the great river salmon and its people are one. And you can take it now.
Here you see the tribal groups that came to the dedication, and they were performing a celebratory dance. What I'm not showing you is that there were other tribal groups that were protesting this because they felt that the colonial presence was still too strong. Okay, let's see. Here we are to the next site at Cape Disappointment.
May I just pop in here and say, Susan, you were at the dedications, and I got there like at this place 12 years after they were put together, after they were dedicated. So this picture on the bottom doesn't have half the vegetation of when I was there at the viewing platform in 2018.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Part of the point of the project is to revive and restore the ecology. And this is certainly an example of what needed to be done.
Oh, can I read my 3 haiku from this platform, the estuary viewing?
Yes.
So all of her installations has places for you to sit and just be there. And so at the viewing platform, Lynn provides a bench. Linger, listen, and learn from estuarine edges. Beneath the platform hides an unseen catch basin near wet meadow plants. Common lady fern, Henderson's checkered mallow, tufted hair grass, buttercup.
Really nice. Now we go to, oh, this is a close-up with an engraved, the quote here is from one of the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition. We go to the other side of the peninsula, so-called Waikiki Beach, and I'm showing you here how it looked at the time of the dedication in 2005 and how it looked when my husband and I went there last year. So this is a dramatic example of restoration. In this site, Maya created a concrete boardwalk which enumerates the factual approach to the landscape that Lewis and Clark pursued. You see here on the right an image of the distances. They were obsessed with measuring everything and map making and naming very much the control of the landscape through word and an idea. So this, at the time of the dedication, Ann, you go ahead.
Okay, once you go back to the boardwalk, can you do that?
Yeah.
Because it looks like just cement planks, but every one of those planks has interesting things written on them.
Yeah, here it is.
But the one thing that Maya Lin wanted us to know, about this timeline is, and this is her quote,
Yeah.
as you take that walk, you're walking through a summary statement of all the places they traveled, counting it out mile by mile. What you realize is that you are walking through all these homelands, and I'm going to read the list. Mandan, Shoshone, Nez Perce, Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, Yakima, Wishram, Chehalis, Clatsop, Chinook.
That's really, really important. I'm so glad. And the other wonderful thing from my point of view is that when we went back in 2020, all of this writing had been rendered almost illegible by the weather. It had worn down, whereas the writing on this part of the site was still clear. Okay, Ann, you're on.
Well, once again, the picture on the right-hand side is from the dedication, and the path is oyster shells over asphalt. But if you look on the left, you can see that by now, the oyster shells are embedded into the asphalt with a Chinook blessing written on pavers. And if you get the book, the whole Chinook blessing, I call it a song, is in the back of the book. But the refrain between each stanza is teach us and show us the way. So because I love words, I was slowly reading each of the stanzas until I got to the middle where there's a cedar stump that's older than Lewis and Clark. They picked it up nearby, and you saw Maya Lynn do something to the cedar stump, right?
Yes, she turned it around. Right. In fact, she's in the process of turning it around as we see this picture, because today it goes the other way. I think I have a picture of that. Yeah, there you see it's turned around.
But imagine that there's more than 200 rings, so we know that stump is older than Lewis and Clark. And a small, okay, go ahead.
She moved 7 driftwood, what she calls totems, around the stump, which represent the native directions north, south, east, west, up, down, and in. You can see them in the slide on the right, more clearly, that there's 7 of these.
And to capture a bit of the mood for me at the cedar circle, I wrote, among the upended lawns, the solitary altar stump, lichen draped alders, I turn for one last view and look up through the bare branches and gasp at the first signs of spring. And this is my picture, so it's February, and things are just beginning out here. And I wrote, flowering current, sunlight on new blossoms, white stars against the blue.
Beautiful. And do you write these pieces on the spot, or did you go home and think about it?
Well, that's why they're field notes. I keep a journal, and I had journals all along the way. And this book came out of me seeing that there was a pattern in the haiku and the narrative. I've never done a book like this before, but this is how the book wanted to be written. I have a postscript on the chapter that Cape Disappointment, and I will share this because this was another reason I wanted to let more people know about the Maya Lynn Confluence projects. So the next morning, we eat breakfast in Astoria, Oregon, and share yesterday's adventure with the waitress. And she is amazed because she camps at Camp D every summer, and she never knew about these Confluence projects art installations. And I'm thinking Maya Lynn would approve. I once read that Maya Lynn kind of was hoping people would just discover them on their own. But here I am trying to get more people to discover them and learn what they have to tell and teach.
But she did believe in working with the landscape. So instead of shoving things around the way those old boys did in the desert with spiral jetties and giant things, she's very subtle in terms of what she's working with and keeping the spirit of the landscape. Okay, we're going to go to the next site now, which is Vancouver Land Bridge. I'm wondering how we're doing on time. I think we're being a little slow. What do you think? But we'll keep moving.
Yeah, go a little faster.
Go a little faster. I thought we were getting a little bit slow. Yeah. So the Vancouver Land Bridge, you saw, was not very far from Cape Disappointment, and it's a dramatic site this is the actual land bridge here. And it's commemorating a site which was an intersection of the inland people, the Clickagat Trail, and the river people, a very important trading area. So they created a control burned on the prairie in order to have a wide open area for trading. It's an incredibly dramatic site. This is a drawing by the architect John Paul Jones of the actual land bridge itself going across a highway. And the two main people who worked on it are John Paul Jones as the architect on the right and Lillian Pitt as the artist on the left. So let's see.
You know, this group of linked poems kind of talks about how incredibly dense the history is along this one place near the river. In fact, it was so dense with also roads, railroad tracks, that a person who wanted to go from the Fort Vancouver Historical Museum could not walk there. They could not, their feet would not touch water. So what they did was they built the bridge beautifully over the railroad, over a road or two, and then down on the other side. So, and
this is a highway. This is a highway here. It says Lewis and Clark Highway Railroad. Yeah, it's incredible. And this is an off ramp. So they basically reconnected. The river is down here, the river and the inland.
And I'm going to read about all the different things that happened there, because this ended up, I said, how can I tell this history with haiku? So it says the Clickagat Trail, that was there first, that once brought tribes and trappers to the river's edge to trade furs and fish and harvest camas, exchange prairie floodplains for homesteads and barracks, lumber mills, airfields, boatyards, linked by trains and roads. This great river's beach is no longer yielding to cedar canoes on its banks. And on that bridge, they have three overlooks: the land, the river, and the people. And
I'll go back.
Oh, good, go back. Okay.
Yeah, land. There's land. Shall I just go through the three? Let's see. People, river. Those are the overlooks. Complete with art critic in place.
Okay.
Okay. So, did you want to read on page 19?
Oh, about the lovely plantings along the.
Oh, because one of the aspects of the bridge is the restoration of native plants, which you see.
Right. And so what I did was I also, okay, I started at the wrong end. I was not at the welcome gate. I started at the barrack side. But what I found were, I just started doing, these are list poems of the plants, some of the plants that are planted there. Wild rose and cattail, sword fern, Oregon white oak, camas and salal, cottonwood, willow, salmon and thimbleberry, western red cedar, vine maple, hazel, snowberry and ocean spray, Pacific ninebark.
So why don't we go back to people, because then you have a nice section on the people.
Yeah, at the people overlook, I read the names of the river people who fished for salmon, gathered roots and berries, and bartered here. Their names are translated carefully into the language of each band and tribe. I study the translations and wonder, how do they sound when spoken? So let me just read these as best I can. Wayuk, Tinama, Tanama, Brooklyn, let me keep going. Idle, Adixalum, Swamladak, Nimipu, Taluit, and Tatianama. And I ruined those, but then the river overlook has the same thing. They're written out as best as they can be. And they're in, if you look above where the cement says river, those are sliced and cut into metal. And so they're made to last and not wear out. So, and I was told by Colin Fogarty that when they were trying to get the right spellings for the tribal names for each of the river, land, and people, they had a lot of disagreements. So the languages were very buried and overlapped and pretty wonderful and almost forgotten. They're really trying to do a lot with bringing back the languages of the people. And that's who once lived here. And that's a whole other.
That's a really important part of the educational aspect of the Confluence project, which we hope we'll have time to get to at the end, because the 7th site is their educational program, which is ongoing, but we better move along.
Right.
Yeah.
We're getting bogged down here. Sandy River Delta, let's do this one quickly. I ran across a reference to the fact that when Lewis and Clark were there, they were kept awake all night by the sound of birds in this site. So here you see the delta and the path to the site here, which is a bird blind, which was constructed, but being Maya-Lin, she doesn't just put up something like that. She inscribed each slat with with birds and other aspects of the ecology that was intact in 1806. And then she commented on whether it was still around, species of concern, etc. today. So she's looking at the span of the whole time.
And this is a really beautiful spot, but you have to walk 1.2 miles along a trail from the parking lot to get to it. A lot of restoration work was done to bring this very impacted delta back to a more natural state. And now when I was there 12 years later, I could hear birds before I got there. It was really beautiful. So here's some of the birds that Lewis and Clark wrote down in their journals. It was birds, animals, and fish and amphibians. So bird resembling lark, mountain cock, heath hen, polecat, the cowan's longspur, western hognose snake, greater sage grouse, goldfinch, white-rumped loggerhead shrike, western tanager, northern Pacific rattlesnake, Columbian toad, large blackbird, raven, Columbia river chub, mountain sucker, crow.
Oh, that's great. So the next site is the Sacajawea State Park. We're moving east, as I mentioned at the beginning. And in this site, Lewis and Clark spent 2 days. And one of the perceptions that Maya-Lin thought about is the difference in sense of time. And as I say here, there's a gathering place for 10,000 years of Indians and trade. So she chose, after some change of plans, to create story circles here. And you can see these story circles are distributed in a circle themselves. And this is what the site looked like at the time of the dedication.
And there was one site that was designated just to Coyote, because there's a famous story with Coyote, what's it called? The Lalawish? Coyote and Lalawish, a traditional Yakima and Klickitat story about what he told his people when he visited them here. Coyote said, "I am leaving you. I'm going back toward the sunrise, but I leave salmon for you. Every year they will come back up this river. Chinook, silver, sockeye, steelhead, bull trout." That's printed on the circle that you're showing right here at the bottom. And these circles are also made out of basalt from our state, of which there's a lot of basalt to be mined. So these should last for a long time.
And this was the dedication. I don't know if you can see if your people are in the way, but there's Maya-Lin. She really learned from the native leaders and tribal groups when she was creating this site, all of the sites, because she came from Ohio, which her main contact with contemporary native culture was zero, and she knew about the mound builders from many years ago. And we're very blessed here in the Northwest with so many contemporary native cultural expressions and leaders. So here's an example of that. All right, Chief Timothy. This is at the very far eastern end of the Columbia River. And
actually, the Snake River now.
Thank you very much.
You know, I made the same mistake. I'm learning how to do my rivers. Yeah, you go beyond. So Sacajawea was where the confluence of the Snake and the Columbia meet. And then you go farther up the Snake. So anyway. So Dave and I'll talk because I've been, Dave and I went and it was on the way to nowhere because all the other places in my book, I kind of say we combined it with visiting friends or going to a festival. But this is so far out of range of big cities that we just made a special visit. And we stayed 2 nights and we rented a cabin there on Chief Timothy. It's not a state park, but maybe it was once. It's now just called Chief Timothy Park. And it's run, the people who run it have just decided to have a recreation group, manage the property. But it's so beautiful because nothing else is there once you get to the amphitheater where Maya-Lynn's listening circle is, and this is where the tribes, the Nez Perce, are meeting to just dedicate the land that her installment is going to be on. And it's from her time with them that she decided to do the circles. And I can read about
that's what it actually looks like.
Yeah.
Now. But you took this picture, I think, didn't you?
I took that picture in 2019.
Yeah.
And there were wildfires in the area, so that's why the air is a little smoky.
Oh.
But it's still quite beautiful. And along the edges, although you can't see it, is where the Snake River surrounds this island. And you can get onto the island through a small bridge. One side of the island is for recreational vehicles and tent camping and fishing in small boats. But the other side is like this, just beautiful and open. And
one of the comments that Maya-Lynn made is it's the only site along the whole river that she worked in that looks like it might have looked when Lewis and Clark came. There's hardly any change here. I think that's really interesting.
And written like, stories written into the basalt, and these are also basalt benches, are directions from the dedication ceremony, and I'll read those. Women sit facing north, men sit facing south, elders sit facing west, and no one is to walk behind them. The east is left open to greet the new day. And then I write, I orient myself to the sun and find the bench that faces north, which means I sit on the south side of the circle. The Nez Perce blessing ceremony requires us to find our place among the 4 directions and to sit silent and listen to what this place has to say. And I say, below deep blue skies, feel the pulse of this island's heartbeat pumping.
It's beautiful. Okay. Now we'll go to the most complicated site, and we'll try not to get too bogged down here because there's a lot to say, but we can do it, Ann. According to my watch, we have about 5 minutes before we want to start some questions. So this site is, as you can see, a major trading site for the entire Northwest. This is a map of all the trading. But this is a waterfall, Celilo Park, and you'll see in a minute what it used to look like and what it looks like today. It was a major place for fish, for salmon fishing. And you can see there were all these different islands, and each group was assigned a different place where they could fish from. I could go on, but I'll try to restrain myself. So this is what it looked like historically with the men fishing off of the platforms. And this is what it looks like today. Ann, do you want to pick it up?
Yeah, so there is a plan for a Maya-Lynn Confluence landscape, not memorial, just to recognize what used to be here. And there are 4 tribes that originally signed off that it was okay. And then I think it was 2018, the Yakima tribe just said no. And it hadn't started being built yet. They just said, no, we don't want anything at this site. We're too sad. We're still grieving. And if you must know, why don't we just take away, there's a Army Corps of Engineers park there. And why don't you just get rid of that? But that's not being gotten rid of. And it's a very complex issue. But from the get-go, Maya Lin said, nothing's going to be built unless the tribes that represent that land and river approve. So right now, Confluence says it's on hold.
This was the blessing ceremony for the Celilo Falls. And you can see up here, I've written that this was the public blessing ceremony. And the previous weekend, 10,000 Indians gathered for a morning ceremony. So this is really profound place for the tribes. These are more of the native groups that gathered at that blessing ceremony. And then this is the ramp that Maya Lin envisioned, but as Ann just said, it hasn't been built. I have one quote from Elizabeth Woody, who's a very important native artist. I think she's a niece of Lillian Pitt. I live with the 42-year absence and silence of Celilo Falls, much as an orphan lives hearing of the kindness and greatness of his or her mother. So that's just one indication of the depth of the change. Let's see, Ann, did you want to?
Well, there are, when I visited Celilo Park, it was after I had been on a 3-day road trip with Confluence educators. And we had just come back from the Warm Springs powwow. And that's the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs Reservation. And many of the tribes that used to call this beautiful part, vibrant part of the river home are now up in the high desert, about a 2-hour drive away. But I had a profoundly joyful experience at the powwow. And then from there, we came down just to stop by the river and see what's left. And so I'll read a couple small poems. Celilo translates into several native languages as echo of falling water or sound of water upon the rocks. When we arrive at Celilo Park, there is no sound of water, no echoes falling, no rocks. And our speaker who talked to us while we were at the powwow is Linda Mianis, and she's the granddaughter of Chief Tommy Thompson, who was the chief at Celilo, the Celilo village. And I'll just read a section from this. That morning we met Linda Mianis, great-granddaughter of Celilo Chief Tommy Thompson, at the Museum of Warm Springs. Linda told her story of living in Celilo village before and after the inundation. When she was a girl, salmon fishing was robust, and the gathering of first foods from the prairies and foothills sustained them. In fact, these are the only foods her great-grandfather ate. Chief Tommy Thompson lived on salmon, roots, berries to 112.
Wow. It's fabulous. Thank you. So this is the 7th side of the Confluence, which continues to connect people to the history, culture, and ecology of the Columbia River through Indigenous voices. And it's an online site. This is the website of the Confluence Project. And on that website, you see it at the bottom of the screen, I hope you can see it, confluenceproject.org. You see videos, interviews, workshops, a great many different layers of education are going on with the people along the Columbia River to continue the story of the Confluence. Okay, Ann. Oh, that's blurry. Did you want to read that last bit in your book?
Okay. So basically, after over 2 years expanse of going and visiting the Confluence sites, I am grateful for that time that I spent in the Lynn landscapes, blessed and collaborated by the river tribes. And these landscapes on the river invite us to listen deeply to the river, learn from the land and its people, sit in silence, ask the river to teach me and show me the way.
Oh, beautiful. Very nice. Should we stop there? Phoebe?
Phoebe?
Yes, that's a good place to stop.
Okay.
Unshare.
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 Let's see. Stop share. Goodbye, share.
Okay.
Hello, Phoebe.
Hi. That was wonderful. I don't know how you guys did it, but you really did pull it together.
We did it with your help.
Right. Oh.
That was
So,
great.
do we want to have questions or?
Yeah, does anybody
See,
have?
oh, there's a lot in the chat. Let's see, are there
Oh,
questions?
yeah, I haven't even looked at that.
Ann Spears says, at the dedication, when Maya Lin stepped up to talk, an eagle flew overhead. Which dedication was that, Ann?
That was the one at the salmon cleaning station.
Oh, great.
Oh, the fish cleaning,
Yeah.
Cape Disappointment, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she came in and was flanked by lots of people.
Yeah,
And there, yeah. And it was very sort of subdued until the eagle flew over. And then everybody sort of took a deep breath and moved. Yeah, I was there and I was glad to be there.
so Andy Platt is asking, what is the Yakima tribe doing to process the loss, and is there any timeline? Since we brought up the fact that they were objecting to Maya Lin's ramp. I don't know if we know the answer to that excellent question, do we, Ann?
Well, I was just on a Confluence project introduction at the very end, and Colin just said, he said Maya Lin just says they are on tribal time. They aren't on 21st century, let's get the job done time. So if it's going to happen, it'll happen. And if it's not going to happen, then it won't happen. But it's not the right time now to move forward on the Celilo village site.
So Jean Carmel is asking, is there time, if there's time, can we talk more about the educational component? I gather that Colin isn't here to save us.
No,
on the
but
question.
if you go to their very wonderful website, it's
Yeah,
called
I'll put it in. here.
Confluence in the Classroom. And they've been, Lillian Pitt has been a real mover and driver behind that, besides being an artist. And I think there's even a Lillian Pitt Foundation to help fund the Confluence in the Classroom. So in fact, I think if I heard right, when Colin said they had money to put into, the last and final Maya Lin installation, that they're just transferring it to education, making videos, having more information about the river tribes, which I have to admit, I have learned a lot that I did not know. There are a lot of people who call the river home and then have been relocated onto reservations, which I guess I should accept and understand, but it takes me a while to learn. My learning curve is huge, and it's the more I know, the more I don't know. So I don't know if I answered the question, but.
Well, I do think that Maya Lin felt the same way as she worked on the Confluence project, that a whole different way of thinking opened up to her, many different ways. And one of the details that we forgot to mention, Anne, was the tribal leaders, I love this image, going to her in Soho at the beginning and convincing her that she would be interested in this project because she had no interest in Lewis and Clark whatsoever, for obvious reasons. And they had seen her movie of the Vietnam Memorial commemorating loss. So they came to her in New York City, and I think you mentioned they brought some mementos with them of their cultural survival, and they convinced her that she could make a monument to their loss as a result of the Lewis and Clark expedition. So that I think is really important, but she had no idea what she was going to learn when she got over there. It was really amazing.
And it's an interesting story that Anton Minthorn, who was the on the founding member of the board, and also what do you call, like he was like a leader on the Umatilla, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla. He was on their original board, but he is also a Vietnam veteran. And so he had been to the wall in Washington, D.C. and was greatly affected by it. So he was thinking with his friends, if there's anybody who's going to do this with us, it's going to be Maya Lin. And then meanwhile, back in Vancouver, her name's Jane Jacobs.
Jane Jacobs, yeah. Jane
Yeah,
Jacobs.
she had the same idea that the person who would know how to do this and do it right would be Maya Lin. And then they got together. It was like within 24 hours and they decided. And then they just invited themselves to New York City and walked in on her studio and introduced themselves and said, here we are, we need you, or something along that line.
I bet they were wearing regalia. Oh, I would have.
I'm sure they were.
Fly on the wall for that meeting.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Does anyone want to raise their hand if you know how to do that and ask a question? Or in the chat? Oh, we have 3 new messages. Let's see. What's all this? This is all sort of, let's see.
I see a thank you.
Lauren Lee says she loves the concept of the story circle and the physical representations. Do you know how the different tribes communicated in their different languages? Whoa, what a good question.
No, I don't, but I think I've heard that there was so much overlapping words, and the Chinook, the ones that the tribe, there's the upper and the lower Chinook, they worked with trappers that they made up, there was a man who was at the teacher's road trip and talked to us about languages. And I brought up the word Chinook jargon and he did not like that.
I bet he didn't.
I'm sorry, but that's, as my white person, I even have a t-shirt that has the something Chinook jargon on it. And he goes, well, that's how we communicated because we went among so many different tribes, including English, including French. And so they came up with a variety of overlapping words that everyone could understand. And I think the same went for all the different tribes that go up and down different tributaries and rivers.
But of course, if this was for 10,000 years, it was way before we had any white traders or French traders or anybody else.
Right.
So I'm sure they had other ways. One of the ways they undoubtedly communicated was through hand gestures, but also through music and drumming and all sorts of eating rituals and things like that. Yeah. There's a comment from Bill Yake. Tribal fishing from riverside cliffs is still observable along the lower Klickitat River.
Good.
I like that comment. I don't know where the lower Klickitat River is. Bill, are you here?
Where's Bill? His face is not here.
Oh, maybe he's put it in and then left. At any rate, it's an interesting comment and we'd love
Oh,
to.
there he is. Bill Yake, is that you?
I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said, where's the lower Klickitat River?
It flows into the Columbia River from Washington State, near Stevenson.
Okay.
That doesn't mean enough to me. Can you give us a bigger place?
North of Vancouver?
North of Vancouver.
Right?
No, it would be substantially east of Vancouver.
East of Vancouver.
Ah, okay. Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's pretty much in that slot where the Columbia is going through the Cascades.
Ah,
Okay.
cool.
Largely, well, about in the middle of that slot. And watched the net fishing with the long poles there several times. And it's, as long as one stays back and is observing it respectfully, there's no problem with being there.
It's not a waterfall that requires acrobatics the way it did at Celilo Falls, though.
What? Yeah, it's on a much smaller scale. It is a falls.
But the amazing inherited techniques of fishing at Celilo Falls are completely lost. They were ingrained in their bodies, and once the falls were gone, the whole thing was gone in terms of that particular movement for those falls.
Yeah, some of the similarities at Klickitat, they do have the planks that are secured to the cliffs with guys. They have small footbridge, a swinging footbridge that goes across and whatnot. But again, on a much smaller scale. Than
I'd love to go and see that. Wow. I see someone said it's inspired her, Kathleen Hummon says, inspired her to visit some of these places and after a long absence. And one of the things I want to say for my East Coast family is perhaps you're surprised by all of the active Native cultures that we have out here. They are very prominent, very important, very articulate and political. And we're really, really endowed with a huge blessing from all of these tribal groups.
Yeah, and somebody said wonderful graphics. Susan did an incredible job putting that slideshow together.
Thank
with
you.
input from Ann too, but incredible.
Oh,
Here's a comment from Lenora Good, a reporter in Yakima used a federal FOIA request and discovered something or other, demand for information. Discovered that the dams that flooded Celilo Falls and Twin Falls, Idaho were placed where they were to drown the falls and force the tribals to leave. Whoa. Worse and worse. Well,
Not surprising, not surprising.
not surprising.
If that's
no.
true. Yeah.
The whole concept of Lewis and Clark was to inform all of these groups that were saving their lives as they went along, that now the US government owned the land and they were going to take over.
Right.
It was pretty bad. Pretty bad.
Well, I think we're about ready to end this great discussion. Unless there's any.
can I add one more thing?
Okay.
One more thing. The process of doing this at the end, when you're an author is supposed to write their biography or about the author, I turned it on to, okay, so what is my homeland and who used to be there before me? And I'm from a small town called Chagrin Falls, and there's a river that goes through it. And it has, and hi, Beth, I see one of my friends in a box here. We went to school together. Anyway, in the book, I contacted the Historical Society in my small town, and I just learned that what happened in Chagrin Falls was the same, but on a different version of what happened along the Columbia. That within a very short amount of time, okay, so the Indian Removal Act, President Andrew Jackson, was 1830, and by 1833, the town fathers came in and set up shop, and dams were begun. Factories were put in. There were more than, 9 dams in 1 mile. And that was so that the new settlers, and it was called the Western Reserve, I think. It wasn't Ohio yet. And so the settlers could come in and get lumber, mill their flour. Anyway, and to this day, there's still a natural falls, a pretty big one and beautiful one. And there's a man-made falls. And if you go up a little bit farther, there's where the old pulp mill was. But I couldn't even envision 9 dams along a river. That's not even close to being as big as the Columbia.
That's
But
incredible.
that's how settlers settled. And so my hometown was somebody else's homeland. And I wrote a little tiny haiku just from I love some of the names. And I'm just going to Algonquin speakers, Iroquois, Shawnee, Erie, Kickapoo, Huron, to name a few. Anyway, and most of those tribes got moved and pushed into Oklahoma.
I just want to end with the screen share, if I can pull it off, of the Confluence
Okay.
project website, and then we'll stop. Because it does suggest what they're doing now, and I highly encourage you to look at this. Can you all see it or not?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
Anton Minthorn, right?
Yeah. It's a beautiful website, and it talks about all the programs they're doing now and for interviews.
And there's
that.
that brochure, right?
Yeah,
They're
So-
free. You can order them.
right. So I'll stop my share so I don't prevent Phoebe from ending our show. If I can figure out how to do it. Tom, are you there? Help.
Stop screen share, just say.
Oh, yeah, right. Stop there.
Okay.
Got it. All right.
Anyway, whoops. Thanks everybody for being here. This was recording live on Facebook, the whole thing, so other people were watching it. Anyway, love you all, and we hope to see you for another podcast. Thanks, Susan. And Susan and Ann, could you stay?
My website is www.annhersey.com, and that's where you order your books.